Good morning. So today's a very interesting day because today is a Lubavitcher yahrzeit.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's a big week for Lubavitchers because Tes Kislev is the yahrzeit of the Mittler Rebbe, who was the son of the Balatanya. And tomorrow is the Yom Tov where he got out of jail. So that you'll ask me, Akasha, how can you get out of jail the day after he died? The Teretz didn't happen the same year. So Yud Kislev is the day he got out of jail, and Tes Kislev is the day of the Rebbe's yahrzeit, the Mittler Rebbe's yahrzeit. There's another very interesting yahrzeit today. It's the yahrzeit of Reb Moshe Shapiro. Who is Moshe Shapiro? Reb Moshe Shapiro. He was, I believe, he was the son of Pinchas of Koretz, who was one of the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, and he was the Rav in the city called Slavita. I'm not sure if anybody ever heard of the Slavita Shas, but they printed a beautiful, beautiful Shas in Slavita. And this Rabbi Moshe Shapiro invested heavily in a very high-end printing press, and it took him 5 years to develop this Shas, and it was the first beautifully commercially available Shas that was printed. It was called the Slavita Shas. And before he printed the Shas, he toiveled the printing press in the mikveh. So the whole printing press was toiveled in the mikveh. Of course, it wasn't in the Aguda mikveh during COVID because it would be closed. But maybe the Kalim mikveh. I'm not sure if it was the Kalim mikveh or if it was the regular mikveh, but he toiveled the entire printing press in the mikveh. And it was a very choshev zach. All of the Gedolim would insist on using Svarim and Sidurim and any other thing that they can get, dafka from the Slavita Shas, from the Slavita press, because it had a kedusha. Now, since he invested a huge amount of money in preparing this, they gave him like a copyright. They gave him a monopoly for 10 years. No one else was allowed to print a Shas. And what happened was, his Shas was so popular that all of his Gemaras sold out in a short period of time. And because of that, the Rabbanim in Vilna allowed a vendor to print the Vilna Shas. We use the Vilna Shas today, right? That's our Gemaras are a variation of the Vilna Shas. And it caused a great machlokes. It was a huge machlokes. And it ended up leading to some terrible things. Now, this Moshe Shapiro, his children, he had 2 sons who took over the press. And they were involved in this big controversy. I don't know the details of what happened, but they ended up meeting a terrible end. What happened is one of the workers in their printing facility got shikar and hung himself. And of course, as Eden, they were accused of killing him. And they were convicted, and their punishment was that they had to walk through 2 columns of police officers armed with clubs who literally beat them to a pulp, after which they were exiled to Siberia, which then they were able to polish, that they got changed, and they ended up spending 17 years in a Moscow jail. When they came out, they were already Shibur Kalim, and their whole press fell into disarray. It wasn't taken care of, and they lost everything. So it was actually a very tragic story. But the Slavita Shas, it's still available today. People still have original prints of the Slavita Shas. I had a Rebbe who had volumes of the Slavita Shas, but I'm pretty sure that there's even full sets of Slavita Shas available. So it's a very, very chashuv set of Shas. So if you ask your Edim what type of Shas he wants, and he tells you Ois v'Hader, and you gasp because it's so expensive, just be happy he didn't say Slavita, because that's even more. So there's always a bright side and a silver lining to everything. So I believe we're right at the top of Daf Daled Amud Aleph. And it worked out beautifully because there was 2 dots right at the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Beis. So we'll get started. Zok Te'ela Gemara. Now, I don't know if the Olam ever heard of a presentation called the Brady Bunch. So thank you very much, Akiva. It's not a new thing, it's an old thing. So let's look at the yichus over here of Reb Chia. So Rashi tells us that Ivoi was the father. Let's see Rashi. Ivoi Oviv Shel Rav Ivoi was the father of Rav. Ochiv shel Rab Chia. So Ivoi was the brother of Rab Chia, which means that Ivoi's child would be the nephew of Rab Chia. So Rav was the nephew of Rab Chia. Ivoi, who was the Oviv shel Rav, was Ochiv shel Rab Chia. So Rav was a nephew to Rab Chia. Min ha'av, meaning Ivoi was Rab Chia's brother, but they shared a father. They didn't share a mother. Now, Ivoi, who was Rav's father, also had a sister, but his sister was not his sister through his father. It was his sister through his mother. So it was literally like a Brady Bunch. It was his and hers and ours. So what happened is Ivoi's sister through his mother ended up marrying his brother through his father. So he ended up so this woman who was Ivoi's sister through his mother ended up marrying Reb Chia, who was his brother through his father. So Kum T'chois,
married her stepbrother.
I'm sorry?
She married her stepbrother.
She married her stepbrother, correct.
That's
correct.
allowed? Okay.
Correct, yeah. So Rav bar Achua, the Rav Chia, ubar Achse. So Rav was both the nephew of Reb Chia through his father and through his mother. So Kisaluk Lahasam, when Rav went up to Eretz Yisrael to visit his uncle, Reb Chia, so Reb Chia wanted to know about the family. So Omer Lei, Reb Chia asked Rav, Ivoi Kayam, is your father, how's your father doing? Is he alive? So Rav didn't give him a straight answer. Rav told him, Ima Kayamis, why you ask me about my father? You don't, what's my mother, chopped liver? How come you not ask me about my mother? And then he said, okay, I'll ask you about your mother. Omer Lei, Ima Kayamis, Omer Lei, Ivoi Kayam, why you ask me about my mother? Ask me about my father. So he answered, like, who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third. This conversation wasn't working out very well. So as soon as that happened, as soon as Rab saw that Rav was not answering these questions properly, he already understood that something's up over here, and it must be that both his sister, meaning Rav's mother, and both his brother, meaning Rav's father, had both been nifter. Except Rav didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, and that's why he wasn't answering them properly. So the moment Rav found out that he lost his sister and he lost his brother, Omer Leila Shame, he instructed his shamis, Chaloitz li min ali, take off my shoes, because he had to parava avelis, v'hoilech kli acharai lebeis hamerchatz, and then carry my kelim to the beis hamerchatz. So he wasn't exactly following the standard guidelines of avelis. So Rashi tells us, v'hoilech kli acharai lebeis hamedrash, or actually let's go back one, Chaloitz min ali lis abel al ochi v'achosi. So I realized that I'm an oval. It was a shmur rechoika, meaning this happened a long time ago. It didn't happen recently, but I still have to prav avelis by taking off my shoes. He was trying to do something that would teach this talmidim how to fear zich. She'ein shmur rechoika shala'achar shloshim yoim. Someone who loyalenu hears about a lost relative, but it's past 30 days. Avelis is only one day, and we know when it comes to Avelis, merely keeping the Avelis part of the day is adequate. He doesn't have to sit Shiva the entire day. How did he show that? Because he said, meaning clearly going to the Beis HaMerchatz is not something that one does during Shiva. And he didn't wait till the next day, meaning even part of the day was enough for him to be Pravah his Shiva. The moment he took off his shoes, he was already Mekayim his Shiva. You see 1 hour, one little bit of Praving Shiva by a Shmur Rechoika would be adequate.
Yosy.
Yes.
How did he know that it was more than 30 days? He didn't tell him.
I mean, just because he asked who said it wasn't recently.
No, because it was a who's on first and second conversation.
I don't know the answer. I can guess because he probably saw Rav had a haircut and Rav didn't have a beard. He was clean shaven. He figured that if it was recent, then he would be a noble still, because he was the son. That's just a guess.
And I would learn something completely different from this. That when you hear bad news, you go to the base of Merchatz right away. That's what it sounds like here. He heard the news, and he told his Eved, whoever it was, to take his clothes to the base of Merchatz.
Well, maybe Talmidim knew that he went to the mikveh already this morning. So why is he going again? So he just wants to demonstrate that you're allowed to go.
I think that they was right that there's a connection.
We don't have the special microphone. You got to speak up.
I know. Okay, so I think they can probably pick it up.
Can you hear Akiva?
Can you hear me?
No, they don't hear
I
you.
don't hear
Yeah, I hear you. I hear him.
Let me hear it. There is a connection between what David is saying. There has to be a connection that he's going to the mikveh after Avelis. It's not that he's, as his minig was to go at 12 o'clock in the afternoon to the Avelis and not to the Merchatz. There is a connection. I'm going to Avelis and then I'm stopping it. By going to the Merchatz, he's saying specifically, I'm stopping the Avelis. How else do you show it? You walk around the block. That's, let's say, what we do. So he's demonstrating the end of Avelis by going to the bathhouse.
Could be. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says weiter. So the Zok Gemara Shmami not class. Rav Chia was exhibiting 3 halachas that he wanted his Talmidim to learn. A is Oval Osher B'din L'Sasandal. Ushmami na Shmur Echoika Einin Haggis El Yom Echad. If it's a long time after, if it's 30 days after, there's only one day of Avelis. Ushmami na Miktas Hayoim Kukuloi. Zok the Gemara weiter. Hahuda Amar Doinu Dini. There was a person who was he loved litigation. Anytime there's an issue, let's go to court. Let's go to the entire. Amri, people have said about him.
Ironically, we're in the Chevra shots.
Oh, what a Chevra is. I don't know the story. I don't know the politic. Oh, Amri, they said about him, Shma Mina Midon Kaasi. This fellow must come from Shevet Dan. Tichsiv Don Yodin Amoy Ka'achat Shifta Yisrael. So we're going to get soon to the brachas in Vayechi that Yaakov gave his children. We see from here that it's not Stam that Yaakov said this is going to happen to you. Yaakov actually told them what their very nature is. And clearly, if someone from Shevet Dan has this litigious type of personality, he always wants to be involved in litigation. There was this guy who he would marvel at beaches, at oceans. Whenever he was by the coast, he marveled. Oh, this is where I'd love to build my mansion. Oh, this mansion is so beautiful because it's an oceanfront. He was obsessed with oceanfront. Botku, they checked after him. Vashkachu, and they found out the Mizvulun Kasi, that this fellow must come from Zvulun. Zvulun likes living by the oceans. So the shaila is, why when the guy wanted always to go to court, they didn't have to be by the Gacharov. Right away they knew he must come from Shevet Dan. But this guy from Zvulun who loved the ocean, him they had to first check to see if he was from Zvulun. So one of the most pashtus they say is, someone who loves a mansion by the ocean doesn't prove he's from Zvulun. Does anybody here not want to have a mansion by the ocean? No one's raising their hand. So that's why they had to check. You know, he talked about it a lot, but it's something that everybody would really want. So that alone wouldn't be a raya.
So why did they check?
Because I guess he was always talking about it. He was like more obsessive about living by the ocean than anybody else. It's funny that we're learning this Gemara now, because yesterday someone sent me a set of pictures of a guy from Lakewood who was very wealthy, and when the whole thing with COVID started, he didn't want a lockdown, so he rented himself a house in Miami Beach. The rent for the year is $1 million. He rented a house for the year for $1 million, and he sent pictures of it. It's exactly the mansion that this fellow was marveling about. It was beautiful. It was oceanfront, but his house was about as far from the ocean as my house is. That's how big his property is. Okay, now that we have a break here, I just want to announce that today's broadcast, and this whole week's broadcast is sponsored by Abdul Zoltan family, the Nishmas, our dear Moshe Zolti, his father, Moshe Zolti, Moshe Ben Chaim, whose yahrzeit is going to be on Yud Kislev, which is Thursday, which is tomorrow. The Shom should have an Aliyah, and he should be a Meilus Yosher for his family and for all of us.
Amen.
So he wasn't.
Amen.
He wasn't obsessed with the ocean, with the boat. He was obsessed with the beach.
That's right. Yeah, it was a beachfront. It wasn't so much he wasn't talking about his boat and his yacht. He was talking about his mansion. That's right. Okay. I also want to thank Akiva for setting us up over here in the Chevra Shas. It's a pleasure over here.
You're welcome. Here comes free coffee tomorrow.
Free coffee. Okay, Zok the Gemara. The hash to the Kaim Alon. Now that we accept the L'chula Alma or Urtuhu, we decided without a doubt that Or, so the Or Larbasa that our Masechta starts with, is night, Michti. So let's think about it. Bein Rabbi Huda, Bein Rabbi Meir, and we're going to learn very shortly about a machlokes between Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Meir about how far in advance you have to aser eating chametz on Erev Pesach. But they both hold that chametz ain't aser el m'sheish shoyis l'mayla. For sure, the Isur Deraisa only starts at Chatzos. So if that's the case, v'nivdoik b'shis. So why do we go make b'dikas chametz the night before? Why so early? Why don't we just be b'dik on Erev Pesach in the morning? V'chitema, there's reason maktim l'mitzvahs, and if you're going to say it's because of reason maktim l'mitzvahs, well then nivdoik mitzafra. So then make b'dikas chametz early in the morning on Erev Pesach. But to make it the night before, why do you say you should do things early in the morning? Betanya we learned, really, really all day on the 8th day is the proper time to do the milah. Elish's reason maktimin lemitzvahs, but it's reason try to do the mitzvah earlier. Shenemar vayashkem avram baboiker, which is referring to the Akedah. So this in and of itself, on its face value, is also somewhat puzzling, because we're bringing a raya to bris milah from Avram Avinu, who got up early, bizrizos, to do the Akedah. When did Avram Avinu do his bris? Be'etzem hayom hazeh, high noon. So you can't bring me a raya to a bris milah that it has to be done early in the morning if Avram Avinu Gufa, who was the Zaris, only made his milah at high noon. So the Mefarshim say that Avad Avram Avinu would have made it early in the morning. But he also wanted it to be the Farhesed, the Olim should know about it. That people were saying we're going to stop him. So Ibdavka did it. So there was a special reason for it, which now brings up a whole new shaila about what's Odif. Is Baroiv Am Hadras Melech Odif, or is Rizim Makdimin Odif? But from Avram Avinu, you see that when it's a shaila of doing it Baroiv Am, you can delay things. There's also a Zashayla. The Achrayim speak about there's a difference between a bris bismanoi and a bris shaloi bismanoi. A bris bismanoi, our Gemara tells us from the Brisa that really the 8th day, the entire 8th day is kosher l'milah. It's only a maili yisera of reason makdimin why we make a bris in the morning. So what if someone's making a bris and it's not in the morning? It's not the 8th day. What if the child was yellow on the 8th day and there was a bris that was pushed off? So there's a little bit of a chalukah deis. Some achronim learn that there for sure it has to be first thing in the morning, because there, once it's past 8th day, every second we want the child to be mold. So as soon as we can mold the child, we have to do it. But there are those who learn that if you make a bris not on the 8th day, it does not have to be first thing in the morning. Okay. So
also, perhaps it was a daytime nevuah. That could have been, and he did it. The day of the nevuah, he did.
Avram Avinu did a bris as soon as he got the nevuah. He went and did it right away.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
I hear. But
anyway, you need a few achanas. You got to get a proper knife, and you got to. Nobody's done a bris milah before that, so it
was probably hard to find a moil.
Right, and he actually the Medrash says that he got instructions from Anor, Eshkol, and Mamre, right?
He asked them. They were the ones who gave him the eights on the milah.
Right. How they would know, I don't know, but that's what the Medrash says. So You need a few achanas before you do the bris milah.
Indeed. That's right. And we're just coming off that sugya of whether or not you're allowed to make that knife on Shabbos.
Right.
Rabbi Lezer holds a chanas mutter. Okay, so Amar Nachman Yitzchak. B'shah shebnei Adam. So the reason why we make bigdikas chametz the night before rather than the day of is because b'shah shebnei Adam mitzuim b'vatayim. Normally in the evening, people are found at home, and the light is very illuminating in the dark. Using a light during the day actually casts a shadow. So that's why it's a practical reason why Chazal established that b'dikas chametz should be done in the evening. Amar Abaye, Zok Abaye, Hilchach Derber, Hai Tzurva Merabanan, a Talmud Chacham, Lo Liftach Beidnei Beorta the Tleisar the Nagir Beisar. He shouldn't sit down to learn. He shouldn't start learning in the evening of b'dikas chametz. Why? Dilma Moshchele Shmaitze, he might get too involved in his learning, and he might get distracted from the mitzvah.
Are you telling me that mitzvah is greater than Talmud Torah? Is that what you're telling me?
If now is the time.
Well,
No, this is a mitzvah of Eretz.
It already exists.
I'm sorry?
The learning is constant. Talmud Torah is constant.
Right, Talmud Torah is right, yet you're still mevatel Talmud Torah to daven at the right time and to shake lulav at the right time. So when you have a mitzvah that now is the time to do it, I think you are supposed to be mevatel Talmud Torah to do it.
Basically, mitzvah, potter, mitzvah.
So you're saying if you're learning, you don't have to do a mitzvah.
And the other way around, too.
Akiva is saying the mitzvah Talmud Torah is all the time, so you should always learn instead of doing the mitzvah.
Yeah,
So
well,
there has to be a time where you have to stop learning to go do a mitzvah.
The point of learning is to know how to do the mitzvahs.
Well, it's actually brought down. Someone brings down one of the Kuvich of Chaim Kanevsky that if a person for some reason cannot do b'dikas chametz at night, he should at least sit and learn the halachas of b'dikas chametz, so he's as much as possible being oisik in the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz. Now we're talking about tenant-landlord disputes. Hamaskir bayis lechaveroi bar ba'aser. If someone rents a house to his friend on the 14th day,
In Miami Beach.
well, maybe in Miami Beach, especially if it's a beautiful lakefront. If he leases a house to somebody for Pesach, right? Al mi livdek. Who is responsible to make the b'dika? Al hamasker livdek the chamir didehu. Is it the responsibility of the masker to be boidik because it's his chametz? Because if I just took over the house on the 14th, I'm just coming out. The chametz that's there is probably chametz that was left over by the landlord. Oy dilma ala soicha livdik. It's the soicha's responsibility to be boidik. The sur b'shusakai, because where is the chametz being found? The chametz is being found in his rishus, and he's the one who has to deal with it. It's interesting to note, the Rashash speaks out that we had a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos right on the first Mishnah. Rashi seemed to say that the reason why you're supposed to make b'dikas chametz is to avoid being over on Bal Yirah u Bal Yimotzei. Tosfos learned no, it's only a derabanan because we're afraid that on Pesach you might find a geschmack piece of food and you might eat it. So the Shas wants to suggest, could be that's Gufa the Gemara Shiloh over here. If you hold that I might be over Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei, who's going to be over Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei? Not the Soicher, it's not his chametz. The chametz that we're talking about that might have been left there would have been left by the maskir. So therefore, if you learn like Rashi that the purpose of the Badika is to prevent someone being over Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzei, it's logical to say that the masker has that responsibility because the masker is the one who's at risk. It's his chametz. But if you learn like Tosfos that the reason why they mandated a badika is so that you shouldn't find chametz on Pesach and by mistake eat it, so it's to prevent you from eating the chametz, so then it makes sense that it's ala soicher livdoik because the soicher has to prevent such a scenario from occurring where he'll find this chametz on Pesach. Zok tehele Gemara. Tashma, let's bring a raya. Hamasker bayis lachaverei. If someone rents a house to his friend, ala soicher lasses loy mezuzah. It's the renter who has to put the mezuzah up. So by the same token, you should come to the conclusion that the soicher has to make the bedika. So no, there's a difference. Hosam ha'omar misharshe Mezuzah chayvus adarhi. Rashi says the purpose of mezuzah is to be a shmira, and since it's a shmira, clearly it's not a shmira for the maskir. Chayvus adarhi lefishi mishamartai. Uchsiv beisecha beyaschon nichnas v'yotzeba. Aval hacha b'dikas chametz is the rabbanon, and since it's the rabbanon, Rashi goes into the whole stickle. Imishum bal yura hamila kaman the saga lebebittel. Imasich daitimnei umash v'likafra v'amakal chamira. So therefore, the svara is that even though the soicher has to put up a mezuzah, but it's not a raya that a soicher would be responsible for the bedika. So hachamai, what would be the halacha? Amar lu Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, Tanina, we learned it in the brayso. Hamasker bayis lechaveri. If you rent a home to your friend, im ad shaloi moshaloi maftechais chalal ba'aser. If the keys were given over once the chiyuv for bedika was triggered, meaning because it's already the 14th day, so the chiyuv for bedika was triggered when the apartment, the house, the mansion, the villa was still in possession of the maskir, then ala maskir lived like. The mishamoshalom aftechos chalal ba'aser, then ala soicha lived like. Now Rashi learns that the significance of handing over the keys is because that's what makes the kinyan. It's like a lech chazek upni. Tosfos learns the keys doesn't make a kinyan, but the reason why it's the keys that determine who has the chiyuv is because practically speaking, you can't get into the apartment to be boidik it if you don't have the keys. So that's why it's totally the keys. So there's a big shaila. What happens if you go away to a hotel for Shabbos HaGadol? You go to the hotel for Shabbos HaGadol and you're leaving right before the 14th. So the shaila is, are you mechuyev or you're leaving the night of the 14th? You're leaving on the evening of the 14th. Are you mechuyev to be boidik that hotel room because you're not Pesach? Let's say is Sunday night, right? So let's say Pesach Sunday night, and you went to for Shabbos HaGadol to hotel. Now you're leaving. You're checking out Motzei Shabbos. Are you mechuyev to be boidik your hotel room? So because technically you're there on the 14th. So the Achronim say it depends if it's a Jewish hotel or if there's going to be Jews in that hotel for Yom Tov, you might have a chiyuv. Now, what happens if you move into the hotel on the 14th? There, for sure, you're going to be mechuyev to be boidik, even though it's really. I mean, we have a shayla over here. Even though it was already the chiyuv was on the masker to be boidik, but nevertheless, you're going to be there over Pesach. You have to make sure you're not going to find anything. And don't think just because housekeeping was there, you're not going to find anything. Look under the bed, and you'll see things. You'll see things. Wherever people don't look carefully, that's where you find stuff. That's a whole different parsha of investigative journalism that we could discuss. So you definitely cannot assume that just because housekeeping was there, that it was properly cleaned. We've determined that if the possession was given to the leasee, to the renter, on the 14th, meaning the chiyuv for bedika was already triggered by the maskir, the person who rented the apartment, does he have to be badik again? Or can he assume that since it was incumbent upon the maskir to make that bedika, that the maskir actually fulfilled his responsibility? I don't understand why you're clearing. Lishaile, let him ask the guy, I'm renting the apartment from you. Did you or didn't you buy the good? So the lesser lahide lishule, the person who leased it to him is not around. You can't, for whatever reason, he's not available. We're not able to get a hold of him. So the shaila is the lesser lahai lishule la truche lahai mai. So the question is, are we going to be matriachim to be boidik again?
How is this different from the previous shaila?
I'm sorry?
How's this different from the previous shaila?
The previous shaila is who's responsible. We've already determined that the masker was responsible. But just because the masker was responsible, can we assume that he did his job?
No.
You as the renter, yeah, sure, he's responsible. But how many times was someone How many times did you rent an apartment in a hotel room and the coffee maker was broken, or the blow dryer was broken, or the toilet was plugged, or there's no toilet paper? That happens. Even though they're responsible to give you your amenities, they don't always give them to you.
Okay.
So, Amar Lu Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, Kinisu, we also learned that in the brayso. Hakoyel nemonim al bir chametz. Anybody is nemon to tell us that they made bir chametz. Now, if you remember, this is somewhat linked to a sugi we learned in Eruvin, where it was a shaila if you could send a cotton to set up an eruv for you, and if you could rely on them. So this brisa was quoted. So akol nemonim al bir chametz, afilu noshim, even women, afilu avodim, afilu ketanim. So frankly, more my time and mahemdi. Why is it that they're believed? Rashi explains, halav b'nei asudininu. They're not royal. These people are not kosher ladies. So it must be lav mishum the balav amira. Even without the balav amira did too. Even without their amira, nami machzakin lebadik. It must be that we're not really trusting their testimony. Rather, we can assume, even without their testimony, that it was badak. The vadai loy over zal. This maskir was surely not over, and he surely fulfilled his responsibility. Even though if he's an amoris for other things, everybody knows how to do. Everybody's makbid on it. So it must be that the only reason why there's an amonis here is not because of the actual nemonis of the cheresh shoyt of the cotton and the noshim. It must be because, regardless of their testimony, lav mishum de cheskase badak, the kasaver akol chaver mem etzel b'dikas chametz. The Tanya we learned. I'll show you. You do find such a concept. Chaver shemeis v'niach megura melei pears. A Talmud Chacham that passed away, and he left a whole storehouse full of pears. Afilu hein b'nei yoiman. Even if they just became mechuyev in Trumas and Maishus, they just became tevel today, the day that he died. Nevertheless, harei mecheskes mesukanim, because we say a chaver will make sure that he'll never have payers that are not mesukan. So oibazoi, maybe you can have that same chazaka here lagabe b'dikas chametz. So tomorrow mai dil mashayni hasam mishum deka amrihani. Who said that it's a chazaka? Maybe it is because of their testimony. In fact, the Gemara, we just said, Atu Amir Dahani Midi Mishasha Ispe, their testimony, we've already determined, isn't valid. So it has to be because of the underlying chazaka. In fact, the Gemara, but that doesn't make sense either. You cannot possibly explain the brisa that way. Elamai, the chaskase boduk, regardless of the testimony, well, then the brisa didn't say good. The brisa said, Hayakol Nemonim. It's not a din of a kol nemonim. What it should say is kol habatim v'cheskas bedukim ba'arba'azim b'boilei. The Brisa should never have said that these people are nemon to tell us that it's badak. The Brisa should say every house, testimony or no testimony, we can assume is badak. Ella mai mishum amir dahani. It must be that we do require their testimony and they have an emonis. I haloi amri hani haloi amani loy. If they wouldn't say testimony, it wouldn't be nemon. So tivship minay, let's bring a raya from there. The ein cheskose badak. Then in fact it's not cheskose badak, and you need their testimony. Really, you can assume that we assume by default that the property was baduk and the masker did his job. So why do we need their testimony? This case was an exception. You can always assume that it would be baduk. But here what happened was, the guy left in a hurry, something, he had a crisis and he had to leave and he didn't have a chance to be boided. So in such a case, you don't have your chazak anymore. The Karmer Hani, but Kine, and these people, Chereshoid V'Kotten, not Chereshoid, who was it? Noshim Avodim Ketanim. And the Noshim Avodim Ketanim said that although the owner had to leave in a rush, we were boidikit. They said it on themselves, we were boidikit. You might think that the Rabbanon do not believe them, since the only chiyuv to make b'dikas chametz is midrabanan who the midiraisa b'bitol ba'al masagi lahu, because midiraisa bitol alone is enough. Hemnu rabbanon b'dirabanan. Since the whole chiyuv of b'dikas chametz is only midrabanan, the rabbanon make the rules, and their rules are that we trust these people to say that they were baitik.
That's it.
I'm sorry?
So this cheskas baitik or whatever would be only in the case where the owner was there before, right?
Correct. If the owner had an option, he had the ability to be able to be baitik, then we'll assume that he was.
He was renting a mansion in Florida and he, was somewhere else.
Well, it was him or his agent. He would have made sure that it was both.
That's true. So
We're assuming a person's going to fulfill his responsibility.
Okay, so he could send the shliach to do it.
Yeah, we're assuming there might be even services that offer b'dikas chametz services. We're going to learn that shortly. we have I just want to interject another very important thing I wanted to say. There's a sefer, I think it's called Michas Baruch or something, it's a Kabbalah sefer, that the Olam quotes that there's a special Shefa, all the gates of Shefa, Ruchni, Gashmis, everything open up wide on the 9th hour of the 9th day of the 9th month. Kislev is the 9th month. Today is Tes Kislev, and the 9th hour using Shas Manias is somewhere between like 1 and 3 in that area, probably between 1 and 2. And there's a special school for Hashbah, so we're supposed to daven at those times. And if you really want to have all of your problems solved, you give $20 to Kupa to air today, and you have it made in the shade. Zok the Gemara weiter, but it's brought down as a big day in the school of Tefillah. Zok the hele Gemara weiter. Iboilahu. Hamaskir bayis lechaveiroi becheskas boduk. You rented a beautiful villa in Florida, an Oceanfront villa in Florida, or you rented a beautiful apartment in Rechavia, and they told you that everything is kosher lePesach. And when you get there, and when you got there, you saw the welcoming basket had chametz gomer in it. You saw when you got there, you saw the 10 pieces of bread what's the name of the school you used to send it out over here? I forgot. Beis Bracha, yeah. Then you see a beautiful big package from Beis Bracha with chametz gomer in there when you get there. Ma what's halacha? Miya v'kamekachtos. Couldn't the renter say, there's a problem here. I'm out. I am not taking this apartment. Or you cannot back out. Tashma. Namar Abaye. Abaye said, Lo mi boy ba'asra de lo yahi v'agra ubatkoi. Never mind in a place where nobody hires anybody to be bought. Everyone does it by themselves. It's not a service that has a monetary value. So in a place where nobody hires others and there's no market, there's no service to do such a thing, the renter is happy that he has an opportunity to do the mitzvah of B'dikas Chametz. And it's not that the vendor didn't provide him with the value that he was expecting to get, because there is no value in a B'dika service. Even if you could put a number on it, even if the going rate for B'dikas Chametz is $250, so I could say that you shortchanged me as the renter. I can say you shortchanged me by $250. I'm still not allowed to back out at least. A person is happy to spend money to do mitzvahs. So therefore, if this fellow is backing out, Rashi says, if this guy's backing out, it's not because of the money. It's because of the principle that I'm having. It's not because of the money. It's mishum milza achriti. Probably he found a nicer apartment, and he's looking for a loophole to release himself from the lease, from his commitment. So he's blaming it on the fact that it wasn't bought. Zok the Gemara, you don't have a raya. Even if you could say that you caused me a loss, you didn't give me value because now I have to hire somebody to do it, we still say that you cannot back out. That's not a problem.
The Gemara's question really hinges on usually cleaning. You rent an Airbnb, just cleaning. Is it included in the standard cleaning? That's
so it's probably not. The B'dikas Chametz is the mitzvah of B'dika.
Right. So, in other words,
so it doesn't include.
I don't have the obligation
to do the B'dika. That's right. Now, even if you do have the obligation, in this case you did have the obligation because I rented it from you on the 14th. So even though you had the obligation, but there's no financial value to that obligation, so I can't back out of the lease for it. So then you have a big kasha. What do you do? What do you tack do if you found a nicer apartment? That I'm not sure. You have to find another excuse to get out of the lease. Zok the Haled Gemara Vayter. Tan Hasim. Rav Meir Eimer. Oichlin kol chomish. You can eat chometz the 5th hour. V'sorfen b'tchila sheish. So if, let's say, we'll call it, if noon is the Shasa Isser, we don't eat right up until noon. You can eat right up until 11, and at 11 o'clock is when you have to start making straight for chometz. So Rav Meir's pushing it back 1 hour to keep you away from Isser. If it's a cloudy day, you might not know what noon is, so therefore he pushes it back an hour. Rabbi Yehuda Oichlin kol arba, you can eat up until 10 o'clock. V'toilin kol chomish, you're allowed to use the chometz. It's not also banoah from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And I believe Rashi says, toilin oichlin v'loy sorfen, klimer in tzarech lisroif, umaychal hu levehemtoi kol chomish. You're allowed to use it, you're allowed to banoah from it, but you're not allowed to eat it yourself. which would be from 10 to 11, which is our minig. And then the serve from Tchila Sheish. And at 11 o'clock is when you burn the chametz. So you're also an hour early. The Chula Amamiyah, everybody for sure agrees that chametz Mishesh Shois Ulamayla Aser. Everybody holds midaraisa chatzois on Erev Pesach is when there's a deraisa the iser chametz. Where do we know that from? Amar Abaye. Abaye says trei kroi ksiva. There's actually two psukim. There are two psukim that we learned this from. Ksiva says in the pasuk shivas yomim sa'or lo yimatze b'vatechem. For full 7 days you cannot have chametz. That covers the 7 days of Pesach. And then another pasuk says uchsiv ach b'yoyim harishon tashbisu sa'or b'vatechem. So what is this extra day? We've already have all the 7 days of Pesach accounted for. So what's this extra day? Haketad the rabbis are ba'asur labir to tell us that there's a part of the Erev Yom Tov, and the Yom Marisha means the first day before you count the 7 days of Pesach. There's a Isser Chametz that's even relevant on Erev Pesach. Frek the Gemara, who said maybe that's not what the pasuk's telling you. Ve'emal rabbis leila chemish asur labir. Maybe I would never know that the first night of Pesach it's osur to have chametz. Maybe I need a pasuk to tell us that the first night of Pesach it's osur to have chametz. If I just had the pasuk of Shivas Yomim Sa'or Lo Yimatze B'Vatechem, I would have thought that Yomim Ksiv Yomim Im Leilos Loi. The Isser chametz is only during the day, but at night. So the night of the Seder, you might think that you don't have to be by the chametz. Kamash Malon Afilu Leilos. Kamash Malon that even at night is included in the Isser. But how do you know that we have an Isser chametz even on Erev Yom Tov? So you definitely don't need a pasuk to teach us that the first night of Pesach there's an Isser chametz. We know that that's pashut. The ha'ishkis hashbosas sa'or lachilas chametz. There is a hekesh between destroying the sa'or to the mitzvah to the Isser of achilas chametz, and we have another hekesh of achilas chametz lachilas matzah. Hashbasas are lachilas chametz. Where do you see that there's a parallel between hashbasas are and achilas chametz? Dichsev shivas yom sa'or lo yimatze b'vatechem ki chal oichal machmetzatz v'nichrasa. So you see that hashbasas are is linked to the Isser of eating chametz, and achilas chametz lachilas matzah. You also have a pasuk that links the mitzvah, the Isser to eat chametz, to the mitzvah of eating matzah. Dichsev kol machmetzatz lo yisechelu v'chol moshvesechem tochlu matzos. Uksiv b'matzah. It says by matzah, but erev tochlu matzos. It says by matzah that you eat matzahs the 15th at night, which is the first night of Pesach. So therefore, it's clear that they would also be an Isser to have chametz. You'd have to be mavayir the chametz already before that point. So then the ach b'yom rishon al kochim must be going even earlier to create an Isser to have chametz even on Erev Yom Tov, and that's why we have to destroy the chametz on Erev Yom Tov. I guess we'll stop here because it's just about 10 to 7. Shkoyach.
Yeah.
Okay, Yosy.
Everyone, remember the 9th hour is the special time for tefillah.
Okay. Can you tell me what? Can you find out when the 9th hour is?
When the 9th hour we can figure out pretty simple because the day was from 7:30 to about 4:30. That's about 9 hours, right? It's about 9 hours, which means every hour is only 45 minutes. So if you want to go to 9th hour, what's 45 times 9? 9 times 360, and 9 times 5. So it's approximately about 6.5 hours. So 6.5 hours from 7:30 is 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:32. It's around 2 o'clock. So I was like from 1:30 to 2:30 would be a very mesugel at the time to daven, and the Rebbeinu Shem should answer all the tefillas and give us a big shefa. And the Rebbeinu Shem is not a stickler. If you daven a minute early, he'll say, "You missed it." It doesn't say that. So all of our tefillas should be answered. We should be zeicher to hashbuas toivus and alam gittin.
Amen.
Amen.
Have a wonderful day.